BBB's 20-minute power chat with an expert. This is a monthly series where we focus on topics that are timely and can also further support your business. Our speakers will present for 20 minutes and then we'll have about a 5-minute period to answer any questions. Feel free to post your questions as we go along in the presentation. And the presentation will also be emailed out to all of the attendees after this webinar, and the recording will also be available on our YouTube channel as well. So today's speaker is Jeff Thompson from the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, and we're going to be talking about business scams and how to be alert and stay protected. So Jeff, with no further ado, I think I will let you take the show.
So thanks, Monica, and thanks to the Better Business Bureau for hosting today's session and inviting the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre to present on scams affecting businesses. March is Fraud Prevention Month, so we do like to get out and do as many fraud presentations as possible, and we do work closely with numerous partners, including the Better Business Bureau, to recognize, reject, and report fraud. So the title of the presentation today is essentially what I'm going to be taking you through. I'm going to start with a brief overview of who the Anti-Fraud Center is, who we are, what we do, and then get into some of the specific scams affecting businesses. So the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center is run jointly by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in partnership with the Ontario Provincial Police and the Competition Bureau of Canada. Our goal is to reduce fraud in Canada, and we do this through a number of initiatives. So it starts by centralizing reporting. So we have a toll-free number and an online fraud reporting system that Canadian consumers and businesses can report to. We also receive international reporting. While we are a police-run center, we are not an investigative agency. The idea behind us is to centralize the reporting and to use that information to support operations and investigations. So the next point here, the Operational Intelligence Support Unit. So if we can, connect the dots between phone numbers, names, email addresses, again, using the information as robustly as possible to connect the dots and connect the various complaints and reporting we get and help deconflict between investigators. So if you think about Canada, if we have Halifax Police getting a report, Ontario Provincial Police getting a report, and Victoria Police getting a report in BC, and they're all getting a report on the same type of fraud with the same phone number, same suspects, they may not be aware that each other's receiving that same report. So we can use, by central sourcing information, we can make those connections and help deconflict with the police services. So we use our information again to support investigations and operations. The next point is fraud prevention and awareness. So key to reducing fraud is making Canada and Canadians the most educated country when it comes to fraud, right? We use the information we collect to identify new trends, new twists, and try and put warnings, fraud bulletins, alerts up on our website, alerts out in social media. We have various distribution lists dedicated to whether it be law enforcement or private sector partners where we spread fraud prevention awareness messaging, or doing presentations such as these. So it's a really key component in reducing fraud. And then the last piece is disruption. So even though we don't investigate, again, the information people have or businesses have when you report fraud are key pieces of information. We know fraudsters need 2 tools to carry out frauds. They need to be able to communicate with victims, and they need to be able to receive victim funds. So if we can get a phone number blocked or an email address blocked or a bank account blocked by working with private sector partners, we effectively reduce fraud and prevent other people from sending money or communicating with the fraudsters. To give you a sense of the reporting at the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center, in 2020, we received 470,000 calls, or over 470,000 calls hit our toll-free line, and 131,000 online fraud reports through our online fraud reporting system, with losses totaling more than $160 million in 2020 alone. And this is up from 2019. So we continue to see fraud rate go up. We are a small team, but we are receiving a high volume of reports. So when we estimate this to be less than 5% of what's actually out there. So this is based on a University of McMaster study in 2008, 2009, that showed that was specific to identity theft and fraud. And the study showed that 13% of victims of identity theft and fraud report to police, and under 1% actually report to the fraud center. We also have a number of case studies over the years that show between 1% and 2% reporting of various types of scams to the Anti-Fraud Center. So we conservatively say 5% because we know there's different reporting rates for different scams. So if I take extortion scams, this is the CRA calling you back taxes. If you don't pay right away, you're going to be arrested, charged, deported. We received nearly 17,000 or over 17,000 reports of that in 2020 versus, say, romance scams, where the fraudsters are creating fake profiles online to solicit people into relationships that eventually lead to a request for money. We received 899 reports of that in 2020. But romance scams was number one in terms of dollar loss. It came in at about 18.5 million, where extortion came in at 12.5 million. So reporting rates vary from scam to scam. And so we conservatively say we get 5% of what's out there. So there's different types of fraud we capture. We're not going to get into all these today. We're upwards of, I'll say, about 40 different fraud types. And we know that the fraudsters are capable of profiling new scams, new twists, new variations to target specific age groups, occupations, businesses, or industries. The COVID-19 pandemic is a prime example of how they were able to adapt, say, phishing, messaging and phishing emails, or spear phishing emails, and even just create merchandise scams centered on personal protective equipment. So the scams we'll cover today are COVID-19 scams affecting businesses, spear phishing, which is a very hot topic today, and vendor fraud or sale of merchandise scams. So for businesses selling goods online. So COVID-19 scams, as of February 2020, as of February 28, 2021, we'd received 13,558 COVID-19 related fraud reports. Of these, 11,789 were victims, reporting just over 7.2 million in reported losses. So we know there's a variety of COVID-19 scams that are specifically targeting businesses, one being merchandise scams, so people looking to procure personal protective equipment, finding bogus websites or being connected, through procurement people to bogus vendors. And we've seen businesses lose large sums of money trying to procure personal protective equipment to keep your business open. So you really want to do your due diligence when you're buying personal protective equipment, PPE. We've even partnered with some of the major vendors, 3M and a few others, to highlight some of these scams or have the reporting redirected to us. But essentially, we've seen hand sanitizers, face masks, gowns, so it's a variety of merchandise scams that have targeted businesses more so in the procurement side of it. The other area we've seen is government benefit frauds. Merchandise scams accounted for about 4.7 million in losses in 2020 alone. So, and we know a lot of it is tied to, again, the personal protective equipment and the COVID-19 merchandise scams. Government benefit frauds, this is where we're primarily referring to identity theft and fraud, but it's also affected businesses. So fraudsters applying for, say, CERB benefit in an individual's name. At the same time, we know they've gone lengths to also apply for, I think it's called CEBA, the Canadian Emergency Business Assistance Program, in a business name. And there's different ways they've done this, from, changing your Canadian corporation number or adding themselves, gaining access to your CRA account, making that application. In terms of the CERB, we're also aware of sort of the credential stuffing attacks that have happened, where they've harvested usernames and passwords from previous data breaches and used those to access CRA accounts to make the applications. So there's different government benefit frauds that are ongoing that are also targeting businesses, CEBA being one of the main ones. Victim vendor scams. So any business selling goods online is subject to receive a fraudulent order. And probably one of the biggest areas we see is card not present fraud, or CNP fraud. So basically, CNP fraud happens anytime you receive an order where the card and card holder are not present. So typically through email, telephone, or over the internet through your website. And typically what'll happen is it'll be like a new order, somebody, like a new request or new order coming in. It'll be urgent. They may pay for it with multiple credit cards. They may, the shipping address doesn't match the address of the card holder. Again, multiple credit cards, and large ticket items. So expensive items you might be selling is typically what they'll target. And again, it'll be an urgent request order that you need to get out right away. So if you process the credit cards, eventually you receive chargebacks. because the cards that were compromised cards or stolen cards that they used to pay for the goods. And if you've shipped the goods, you might be out of luck with getting the goods and plus the chargeback. So we've seen businesses go bankrupt because of CMP fraud. So it's certainly something to keep an eye on. And it's something that's been on the radar since, chip and pin rolled out, right? So when chip and pin rolled out, what we saw was the credit card fraudsters turned to the CMP fraud environment as it was harder to skim card data. The second area of victim vendor frauds is purchase order scams. So this is almost like a business email compromise scam, which we'll get into, but essentially it looks like it's an order coming in from a client you may already know or do business with, or a reputable business, and they want to set up a purchase order, again, ordering large ticket items, placing large orders, large amounts of equipment or goods that they're looking to order. You set up the purchase order, you ship the goods, and then the purchase order never gets paid. So they're essentially spoofing known or reputable businesses, in some cases, businesses you may already do business with. And this is one that's been ongoing for about at least 3 years now that popped up. Oftentimes with purchase order scams, what we see is goods will ship to a domestic logistics company or a reshipper. And once they hit that logistics company, then they're reshipped overseas to potentially another logistics company or reshipper, and then onwards to even a third country. So very much international in scope with a lot of these frauds. So one of the main areas that's popped up over the pandemic and COVID-19 pandemic in the past year is the spear phishing attacks or business email compromises. And there's 5 different variations of spear phishing that we see. And this scam typically is number 2 in terms of reported dollar loss, and again, a more underreported fraud. So it's the 5 different variations, starting with the first one, your business executive spoof, probably the most common business email compromise or spear phishing attack. And this involves employees of a business receiving emails that look like it's coming from the president, the CEO, the chief financial officer, and asking for an urgent transaction to take place. So in a lot of cases, some of the early cases we saw, targeting, say, smaller associations, hockey associations, or religious groups, what the fraudsters would do is they'd see that the president, your business, you have the president of the company listed on your website, and you have your treasurer listed on your website. So in the case of a hockey association, they could send an email that looked like it came from the president and directly to the treasurer, because the contact information for these people was listed right on their website as well, also making it more easy to spoof. So the email goes in, it looks like it's coming from the president or CEO, and it asks for an urgent transaction, often cases of wire transfer to take place. And usually, I'm working overseas, maybe not during the pandemic period, but I'm working out of office, or I'm conducting urgent business with such and such. Can you please complete the following transaction for me immediately? I need this done ASAP, right? So with the business executive spoof or with any sort of spear phishing, one of the key things we want to encourage is to have a plan in place where any requests for transactions to take place over email are confirmed in person or verbally over the phone, right? In many cases, the fraudsters will say, I can't talk right now. Another example was, that hit the school boards was, it looked like it was an email coming from a principal of a school going out to all the teachers saying, I'm in a meeting at the board. Our staff meeting's happening next week. I'd like to be able to go out and buy gift cards for some of our staff whose birthdays are coming up. Can you please go out and purchase me some gift cards as soon as possible, right? And obviously a little bit more targeted, a little bit more crafty than the language I'm using here. Oftentimes with the spear phishing attacks, the fraudsters will, if they've infiltrated a network or a business network, they will monitor the communications between CEOs and financial departments and employees and understand the language that's used and what the relationship is between people. So again, that they can craft these emails to make it more believable. The supplier contract swindle. So businesses, McCune University out in Edmonton, Alberta, probably the best example of this. That was one that was in the news a few years back. I think it was about $11 million fraud, although I think they were able to recoup some of their money. But essentially, the university was I think they were building new residence or dorms, or had some big contracts going on with contracting companies and building companies. And the fraudsters were able to insert themselves into the communications again between the contractors and the university, and say, this is the contractor. I've recently updated or changed banks. Can you send the next payment to this new account? And again, the university, without verbal authentication or any sort of authentication, sent the next payment for the next invoice to the new account, which was an account controlled by the fraudsters. Head office spoof, one targeting franchise businesses quite frequently. I'm just trying to pick a business. I'm not picking on anybody here, but say like a 7-Eleven or a convenience store gets hit, and it might be over a phone or an email, but the email will look like it was coming from head office saying, we're currently experiencing problems with our gift cards. And the employee that's working that day picks up this email. Can you go grab some gift cards off the shelf? Go grab some Google Play cards or Amazon gift cards off the shelf, scratch the numbers off the back, and give me those numbers so we can test these cards. So again, it's an email that looks like it's coming from head office, targeting employees working a specific day, and often targeting franchise businesses. The payroll spoof, this is one targeting payroll departments essentially. So similar to maybe the business executive spoofs, but in this case, it's emails that look like it's coming from other employees of a big company. And it's emails going to the payroll department saying, this is Jeff. I've recently changed banks. Can you update my direct deposit information to the following bank account? And again, if the payroll department does this, it's an account controlled by fraudsters, and now my paycheck is going to the fraudsters, and I'm not getting paid. So it's one that's uncovered more quickly, however, can result in fairly substantial losses if all employees are hit, right? Financial industry client spoofs. So these are ones that we haven't seen these in a little while, but they still do exist. Typically targeting sort of the investment brokers or financial dealers associations, or even banks in some cases. But again, it would be like an email. It looks like it's coming from a client of an investment company, saying, I'd like to withdraw my investments. Can you withdraw my investments, or I'm purchasing a home overseas, or I'm purchasing a new house, or I've got something else going on in life. I need to help my family. I need my money out right away. Can you withdraw my money and send it to this new account? So in all these cases, spear phishing is essentially a scam of trust. So people are receiving emails that look like they're coming from somebody they know and they trust. And the fraudsters are spoofing email domains or business domains, or they've actually infiltrated your actual network and able to send emails that look like they're coming internally. So the idea is it's a scam built on trust, and it's a scam designed to get you to wire transfer in most cases. And then some cases today we're seeing, like I said, the gift cards, money on an urgent basis. So it's really important to have a plan or policies in place that stop people from conducting transactions based on an email request. Any sort of transaction should be verbally authenticated. There's other little tips, making sure you're monitoring the email addresses where things are coming from, making sure that things aren't out of the norm, hovering your email over the email address, sending a separate email or contacting the person separately from the initial communication that you received is always good practice, right? So how can we protect ourselves when it comes to business frauds? Step one is training your employees about cybersecurity and fraud, right? And this doesn't have to be costly. You can dedicate an employee in your business. There are third-party vendors out there, depending on the size of your businesses, that offer, gamified content and various cybersecurity training. And there's a great tool book, which I think I have in my next slide, the small, medium business cybersecurity guide put out by the Canadian Cybersecurity Center, which offers you, it's about a 60-page document, but it offers you some really good tips on how you can set up, have your policies and your plan in place to help the employees at the end of the day. So train your employees and have policies and plans in place to help employees, from knowing who to contact if they suspect fraud or if they receive a suspicious email. What should they be doing with this? Do you just want them to delete it? Should it be forwarded somewhere? Should it be reported to police? So it's really important today. And I really can't stress enough to have these policies and plans in place, and some form of training for employees, especially about phishing and spear phishing, which are two very common scams right now. Know who you're dealing with. So consider compiling a list of companies your business deals with to help employees know which contacts are real and which ones aren't. This refers to, I didn't really touch on like sort of false invoicing scams or directory scams, but they're scams that target businesses where, it's a assumptive sales tactic. This is Jeff calling. I'm just, from ABC Paper Supplies. I'm just calling to confirm your address is still, PO Box 686. And, an employee might say, yes, it is. And next thing you know, you're getting an order of ribbon and roll for your debit machine or some sort of paper product or some other product. Or you're being subscribed to some sort of online directory which you never used to subscribe to. So it really helps if you have a list of companies or rules around businesses that you do work with, and making sure that the people that are responsible for procurement or payments are aware of what businesses you usually do business with. Make sure you inspect invoices thoroughly before you make a payment. Again, this is that assumptive sales tactic. Directory scams are a very common one where you get an invoice that looks, and it's saying to renew your subscription for ABC directory. So we've seen these cases where these invoices get paid without, people even thinking twice because it's got that word renew in there. So you just think you're renewing something you already have. So it's really important to inspect invoices thoroughly before you make a payment. Yeah, so again, this ties into, all the previous ones. Educate employees, right? At every level to be aware of any unsolicited call or email. They shouldn't provide any sort of company information or confirm any information, again, without doing some due diligence and scrutinizing who's really calling. Limit your employees' authority by only allowing a small number of staff to approve purchases or pay bills or make transfers. Again, that's, again, ties back into training and having plans and policies in place. Beware of spear phishing. Have policies in place to verbally confirm requests for urgent wire transfers or purchases. We've touched this already. And then review potentially fraudulent orders. So in the CMP environment or card not present fraud environment, or the purchase order type scams that we see, it's really important to and again, there is fraud detection softwares depending on the size of your businesses that are out there that can be procured, but higher than normal. I'm trying to remember all the red flags again here. So larger than normal orders, urgent orders, orders going out of country, buyers, the card information doesn't match the buyer's name or shipping address. Multiple cards being used to make a payment, and again, just sort of the large ticket items, large orders, and urgent requests. And then the last point here, again, the Get Cyber Safe guide from the Canadian Cybersecurity Center, a fantastic resource. It came out a few years back. We work closely with a lot of government departments. But when it comes to educating businesses about fraud, small, medium-sized businesses, this is often a guide I referred to. It's a great starting point to go and develop your plans. And again, it doesn't have to be, but it doesn't have to cost you a lot of money to educating businesses about fraud, policies and plans in place. Businesses, and this guide offers you a good starting point. It's a great starting point to go and develop your plans. Last thing I can really say is really about cyber hygiene. It doesn't have to cost you a lot of money to have, knowing that policies and plans in place, developing routine practices. This guide offers you that help a good starting point your employees and yourself and your business succeed. So other things I haven't touched on is, that would be in the Get Cyber Safe guide, or, ensuring your computer networks are secure, making sure softwares are up to date, making sure people understand the importance of using unique usernames and passwords across different accounts, making sure there's some level of antivirus software installed, and then all the other how to protect your points I've touched on here. So reporting fraud. So recognize, reject, report, obviously, are the key pieces. Reporting fraud really starts with, and we want people to report whether they've lost money or not, so whether it's businesses or people, the information you have from a fraud is useful information in reducing fraud. Like I said, it can be used to link cases, and we can also take steps to disrupt some of these services or try and disrupt some of these services. And reporting fraud today starts by gathering all the information pertaining to the fraud, whether it's email correspondence, receipts, documents, telephone calls. And we really want people to create a chronological statement of events. The frauds are getting so complex today with the business email compromises, even some of the vendor frauds, the purchase order frauds with all the different shipping that happens. So it's really important to create that chronological statement of event, the who, what, where, when, why, and how it happened, right? And document day by day about who you talked to, when you talked to them, what they told you, how they told you to send money, what the Bitcoin addresses were, have documents and receipts ready. So it really helps when you're reporting, if you have it all put together in a nice package, because the scammers are coming up, the fraudsters are coming up with new twists, new trends every day using new techniques or payment mechanisms that we may or may not have heard of today. So the frauds are changing so much. It's really important that there's sort of a clear, concise report of what's actually transpired that we may or may not have
Step two is
heard of
reporting
today. So
reporting
the
to your
frauds are
local
changing
police.
so much. It's really important.
Fraud
that
is a
there's
crime
sort of and needs to be reported to your local police. You often pay taxes in a community, and those local police are there to serve you. Local police, in most cases, are responsible for collecting the victim evidence and information in their jurisdiction. And if it's an international or national investigation, there's channels that they can go through that request the appropriate assistance. Step three, contact the Anti-Fraud Center. Again, we do work with local law enforcement. They may share your information, and they may also suggest that you call us directly. And more so in a case where you haven't lost money or personal information or been subject to any sort of data breach. They might direct you right to us, and the easiest way to report to us is online. As you saw, we get a high volume of calls, so reporting online is the easiest way to go. And we are working on developing a new system. We are working with the RCMP's National Cybercrime Coordination Unit to develop a new online fraud and cybercrime reporting system that is more accommodating to small, medium enterprises and to Canadian consumers in general. Report the incident to your financial institution. So if a wire transfer was sent, in the case of a spear phishing, the first call you should be making is to your FI, your financial institution, to see if you can put a stop payment or a recall on that wire transfer. And this holds true to any sort of payment mechanisms, whether it's gift cards being handed out to fraudsters or other sorts of payment methods being made. You want to go back to the place where the money was sent and report the fraud and see if you can put a stop payment on it. In most cases, once money's sent, it's difficult to get back. There's a small window for that to happen. Often, I would say if it's past 3 days or 72 hours, there's it's a low likelihood of getting money back after that point. Step 5, report to the fraud to where the fraud took place. So whether it's an email service provider, social media service provider, a dating website, etc. Again, this helps with the disruption side of things. It will allow these service providers to review those accounts, potentially block them or take them down, so it prevents further fraud. And then the last piece is for victims of identity theft and fraud, which doesn't necessarily apply to businesses, but we'll talk about it briefly from a personal level. If you're a victim of ID fraud, it's really important to get a contact with the credit bureaus, put fraud alerts on your credit profiles with Equifax and TransUnion. And again, in sort of that cyber hygiene and best practice world today, we really encourage people to request copies of their credit reports once a year. That way you're seeing if there's any fraud accounts out in your name. So again, where to report, fraud is a crime, starts with your local police. You can also report to the Canadian Fraud Center's fraud through our online fraud reporting system. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Better Business Bureau Scam Tracker on their website as well. They have a reporting mechanism, offers great visuals of the different frauds happening across Canada and North America, as a matter of fact. And if you're ever wondering or doing research on businesses, we also recommend visiting the BBB website to see if they have ratings or if businesses registered there as well. Thanks very much, and I'll turn it back over to you, Monica.
Thanks, Jeff. That was great. I know a lot of times, Jeff, when we're talking about, scams that affect businesses, sometimes smaller businesses feel like, okay, well, there's only maybe 3 or 4 employees. And so it's probably going to be easy for me to be able to catch it if something happens. But is that really, what would you say for a smaller business if they're thinking, okay, I don't really have a lot of things in place? What's the best place to start that would allow them to at least put some things into play to protect themselves?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the Get Cyber Safe guide is really a good starting point. It's about a 60-page document. You can, small business owners can review it on their own, see what they have or don't have in place, see what information that, there's chunks of it that you can, just basically print out and give to your employees and say, read this or review this, right? and make sure that they understand, like, or have that staff meeting that, that get together where you spend an hour talking about things in there, maybe an hour a week or something, or however often you have your staff meetings, and pick certain subjects to sort of educate your staff on in there, and like I said, email etiquette, email phishing, business email compromise are two of the common scams we're seeing today, targeting people, and more from our work from home environment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you and I were also talking about, like what is an easy resource for small businesses. So as you mentioned, there's that report that they can go through, but then also even just this recording, maybe you taking this recording, going through it with your employees, being able to just have them understand what type of scams potentially they could come across. And that in itself, awareness is a big piece as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there are, visiting the Anti-Fraud Center website, visiting the Better Business Bureau website, again, it's recognize, reject, report, so recognize that fraudsters are using every means at their disposal. So if you do, and that's the other thing, if you do experience a scam, or your company is hit by some type of fraud or scam, make a point of bringing it up at the next meeting, making sure that all the employees know about it, right? This is what we just experienced. This is what just happened. This is how we dealt with it. Be aware that we're being targeted with this stuff, that it's circulating, and really spread the word. It's about spreading the awareness messaging to your staff, family members, and friends, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you had mentioned reaching out to local police. Last week, we also spoke to actually local police to just talk about scams that were affecting our area. Sometimes, they mentioned the same thing about timing. So, you mentioned within like 72 hours later, if money has been moved, potentially it's harder to track it and get it back. So if people think that they have been caught in this scam, what's the first thing to do? Pick up the phone, call the police, or, like a lot of times the reaction time can sometimes eat up a little bit of time and prevent us from being able to access and track things down.
Yeah. So yeah, I would say, um, a lot of cases we get reported from business, they don't know their level of exposure firsthand. They suspect a fraud's happening. They're calling us, and we're giving them advice and mitigation. It often leads to them calling the local police, but it also often leads to us saying, create that like, why did you call me today? Like, what happened that made you call me? So start that chronological statement of events as soon as possible. And that will help you sort of track what's going on, and what sort of, the T's you got to cross, the I's you have to dot, and what's your next call going to be. But certainly, in terms of recoveries, calling your bank is often, I might throw that in front of calling your local police, right? Like, if you find out that, an employee sent an urgent wire transfer, call your bank and request, talk to the manager, or go into your bank and request that stop payment or wire transfer recall as soon as possible.
Right. And some of that information is also useful even for the local police to be able to track down some of those details.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, Jeff, this has been great. Thanks so much for your time and coming to join us today. I know that we've had a lot of requests over the, especially like this month because of Fraud Prevention Month, but over the time just about small businesses and how they can protect themselves. So as I mentioned, this is going to be available for replay again on our YouTube channel. We will share the presentation with everyone who attended today, and also the links to the reports and some of the other resources that Jeff had mentioned. So thanks so much for attending, and we will have another 20-minute Power Chat again at the end of next month. So if you can join us then, we'd love to see you there. Thanks again, Jeff.
Thanks for having me.